Welcome. This video goes over the SAGA game elements designed to help veterans with PTSD. My name is Dan Thompson. I'm a principal researcher at SIFT, a company specializing in human factors and artificial intelligence research. SIFT created SAGA as an online game to teach players how to create comics with the goal of educating players about PTSD and taking some of the mystery out of prolonged exposure therapy. SAGA isn't trying to create a new therapy for PTSD, but to get players to enroll in evidence-based therapy and stick with it longer. As an online game, SAGA provides an easy way to learn about PTSD and conduct some simple exercises in the comfort of the player's own home, without having to face some of the challenges of getting to the VA to take treatment. SAGA has two phases. The first phase teaches the basics of comic creation and how to use the game to create comics of their own. To illustrate some of these important comic lessons, we have created a series of PTSD education comics that illustrate the key features. I'll show you some of those coming up. The second phase provides low-intensity self-guided exposure exercises to illustrate what prolonged exposure therapy will be like. The player starts off with a low-intensity exercise, and the intensity gradually increases. SAGA consists of missions. We're seeing a list of missions here on the front screen. These are some of the missions in the educational phase, and then some of these are the missions in the exposure exercises phase. Let's take a look at an example mission here. This illustrates how PTSD comics are used as education and to illustrate comic creation principles. In this mission, they're learning how to make characters that have unique shapes and silhouettes and color schemes so the reader can easily recognize them, and they use Star Wars as an example. For the educational comic, what we do is we create a new comic where our professional comic artist, Xander Cannon, has personified some of the complications of PTSD, giving each one a unique shape so that the reader can recognize them in the various scenarios. The comic goes on to explain how PTSD starts and the actual impact of these symptoms on the player's life. So to learn about comics, the player also has to learn a little bit about PTSD. Next, we'll show you the safety plan mission. The safety plan mission creates a first aid kit for the players with a set of numbers to call should they need help. We explain why they would need a safety kit, and then we basically collect information from them, their local hospital, their local VA. We have them put the VA crisis line in their phone. We also have them collect a number of friends they can just talk to if they're having a bad day. Basically, this is pre-planning in case their condition does start to worsen. This will be useful information to them in the SAGA game and without. The mission also describes a number of hurdles that will happen if they try to go to treatment and for dealing with PTSD, and has them brainstorm about potential ways for solving that, so that if they ever get to the point where they want to look into treatment, rather than using these as an excuse, they can look at some of the solutions that came up early on here. Now for this mission, what we do is normally the players are drawing, but what we've done is we've already provided them a drawing and they just have to fill it in with their information. So the information they provide is automatically put in here. They just have to adjust it so they like the way it looks. And when they're done, they save it. Next, let's look at the private fire phase of SAGA. The private fire phase contains all the exposure exercises that the player does, starting with low memory engagement and increasing their memory engagement in their traumatic event memory. The phase starts off with 4 missions, as you can see here, that provide a basic education on what we're trying to accomplish, a little bit more about prolonged exposure therapy. It also describes SUDS, subjective units of distress, the self-report metric that we'll be using and collecting at the end of every mission to capture information on what level of anxiety the player actually felt. This third mission here is actually describing how the game actually uses SUDS. SAGA never uses the SUDS metric to advance the game or prevent the user from getting a reward. It just tracks the SUDS metric. It's up to the player to decide how deeply to engage the memory, if they can, and at what level. We're basically providing some guidelines that they start low at a SUDS metric of 10, complete 3 exercises at that level, and then we'll up the goal to 20, SUDS metric of 20, and then complete that exercise 3 times. But let's start looking at the first mission here. Here they're just going to make a very simple 3-panel story. The mission reminds them of what their target is. So this is their first mission. So the target is 10. In this example, I've already added the artwork here behind the scenes just to save time in the demo. And so, say this was an example where a soldier was out on patrol, and they would create this drawing. Now, rather than actually represent the actual traumatic event, what we're going to do is we basically give them a symbol that they can use to represent that event. It prevents them from having to draw it. Now, in the later missions, they can choose when to decide to replace the symbol with an actual rendering of the event. But we assume that will be quite late in the process. Then here in the last panel, so basically we're sandwiching the event, and then the last panel they show sort of the aftermath. And what we've selected here is basically the case where they're in the hospital recovering. So now the player has created a 3-panel comic. They're ready to review it. They click here. They see their comic. At the end of every mission, they provide us a SUDS metric. Next, let's look at the playbook mission. This is another exposure exercise mission. In this mission, basically they create a diagram much like a football playbook or an accident report. They just talk about the actual placement and movement of the entities involved in their traumatic event. Again, to save time, I've drawn the first panel. This next step, basically, they're just showing the action that took place that happened. So they basically repeat the first panel. As you can see, it appears here in blue. We're able to basically allow them to refine drawings or reuse drawings, depending on how much work we want them to do in the exercise. And of course, tracing over blue images allows them to make the images much better if they like, or add more detail. In this exercise, basically, all they need to do is talk about adding the arrows that show the movement. Again, we use the symbol for the actual event, and in this case, we ask them to actually add some text, like, for example, say that this was an ambush. And they can position that and label that as they like, basically adding more detail. And again, when they're ready, they can view the whole comic, and once they're done viewing the comic, again, they can provide a SUDS rating. Finally, I'll jump ahead a couple of missions and show you an exposure exercise where the player becomes more part of the comic. In fact, this is where we first have the player render themselves into the comic. This is called Factors of 10. Basically, it starts out and zooms from way out, and it zooms in on them. Now, in this example, rather than go through the mission, we've created a sample comic to show them what it looks like. But basically, they start off in space, and they zoom in onto their own eye. And inside the eye, they'll see the reflection of the actual event happening. As you can see, over time, the exposure exercises build, increasing the player's memory engagement. So, in conclusion, the goal of SAGA is to give players some early success with exposure exercises. The game teaches them to expect exercises they can't complete, and the game has this running theme of therapists as coaches to help them through those hard exercises.